Derek Marsh stood up in the middle of his mother's 70th birthday dinner and set a brown envelope down next to his wife's plate. Not slid it. Set it, deliberately, so the corner touched the base of her wine glass, close enough that everyone at the table would notice before she'd even opened it. Divorce papers, in front of 11 relatives, on the good china his mother only brought out twice a year, Christmas and this. Derek had planned the moment for weeks. Public. Sudden. No room for Elena to react without looking hysterical in front of his whole family, which was exactly the point. He believed, all the way down in his bones, that blood beats a marriage vow every single time, that whatever happened next, his mother would land on his side of the table because that's simply what mothers do for their sons. He was 37 years old, and as far as he was concerned, he had never once been wrong about his own family. Tonight he was about to find out how wrong a person can be, at exactly the wrong table, in front of exactly the wrong woman. This is the story of Elena Marsh, and of the mother-in-law Derek never bothered to understand, even after 15 years of sitting across from her at Sunday dinner. Derek was a regional sales director at XTR Logistics, the kind of job that came with a company Buick, a cubicle with actual walls instead of the low gray partitions everyone else got, and just enough authority to make him insufferable around Thanksgiving. He liked being the guy who fixed things. He liked being right louder than other people were right, in meetings, at dinner parties, in the driveway arguing with a neighbor about a property line that didn't matter. And somewhere around 14 months before that birthday dinner, he'd started sleeping with Bailey Kinsley, a logistics coordinator 2 years out of Ohio State who sat 2 pods over and laughed at jokes that weren't especially funny, the kind of laugh that flatters a man into thinking he's still young. It didn't feel like a decision to him if you'd asked him at the time. It felt like something that had simply been arranged for him, which is more or less how Derek experienced most of his life, as a series of things that happened to him rather than things he chose. He and Elena had been married 9 years by then, in a 3-bedroom house on a cul-de-sac in Lima, Ohio, both their names on the deed, a mortgage payment that hit the account every 4th of the month like a small, dependable heartbeat. 2 kids, Noah, 7, obsessed with a dinosaur encyclopedia he'd basically memorized, and Lily, 4, who still needed the hallway light left on. There was a swing set in the backyard. Derek had put together wrong the first time, one crossbar reversed and never gotten around to fixing, so it creaked on the left side every time either kid used it. He'd started reading Elena's quiet as something closer to surrender than patience, his first real mistake that year, though far from his last. Somewhere in there, he stopped hiding his phone quite as carefully, leaving it face up on the kitchen counter while he showered. Somewhere in there, he started thinking of his own house, less like a home and more like a place he was merely stationed between other things. What Derek did next, he told absolutely no one. Not Bailey, not his brother in Columbus, not the guy he golfed with on Saturday mornings and complained to about everything else in his life. He called the divorce attorney's office 40 minutes away in Toledo, far enough that nobody from Lima would recognize him in the waiting room, and booked a consultation under a fake calendar entry, vendor meeting, Toledo, 2 p.m. He told himself the appointment didn't mean anything yet. Just information gathering, he thought, sitting in traffic on the drive over, rehearsing the line in his head like it made the whole thing smaller. He wore a golf polo instead of a work shirt so the receptionist wouldn't clock him as coming straight from XTR. Little precautions like that made him feel careful, competent, like a man managing a problem instead of a man who'd already decided how the next year of his family's life was going to go. Elena Marsh taught 3rd grade at a public elementary school 15 minutes from the house. The kind of job where you come home most days smelling faintly of dry erase marker and glue sticks, more tired than anyone quite believes a person can be after spending 7 hours with 22 8-year-olds. She was 34. She had a habit going back to the very first year of the marriage, not a fancy system, just a plain Excel file she'd titled Household years ago and never renamed. She updated it most Sunday nights at the kitchen table, while Derek watched whatever game happened to be on in the next room. Groceries. The mortgage. Noah's orthodontist consult. Lily's daycare copay. All of it lobbed, almost compulsively, a habit her own mother used to gently tease her about at Christmas. That habit is what saved her, though she had no way of knowing that yet. About 3 months before the birthday dinner, Elena noticed the joint savings account was thinner than it should have been. $18,400 thinner, to be exact. Pulled out in 12 uneven withdrawals over roughly 12 weeks, logged in the bank's app under categories so vague they were almost funny: travel, professional services, once just misc, as if Derek couldn't be bothered to invent a convincing lie. He hadn't taken an actual work trip in months, and she knew that because she was the one who used to pack his bag back when he still let her do that kind of thing for him. She didn't say a word. She opened a new tab in her spreadsheet, named it something boring enough that nobody glancing at her laptop would think twice, and started logging dates and amounts one line at a time, in the same flat, careful handwriting she'd used to log a grocery run. A reasonable person watching from the outside might wonder why Elena didn't just confront him that first week, slap the bank statement down on the counter, and demand an explanation right then. She thought about it. She actually drafted the sentence a few different ways in her head, lying awake at 11 at night while Derek slept beside her like nothing in the world was wrong, which, infuriatingly, he could always do no matter what he'd done that day. But she also knew Derek, maybe better than he knew himself. She knew that the second he felt cornered, he would go quiet and careful in a way that would make everything after that impossible to trace. Cash withdrawals stop looking like anything once a man realizes someone's counting them. And there was something else weighing on her, something specific and not pretty. Derek held 40% of the shares in Marsh & Co. Hardware, the family hardware store his mother had spent 3 decades building, a stake handed down to him years earlier as a kind of head start. Elena had heard him mention that ownership offhand more than once, the way you'd mention a spare tire sitting in the trunk, something he clearly assumed he could lean on if a divorce ever got ugly, a bargaining chip dressed up as an inheritance. If she moved too fast, she'd tip her hand and lose the one real advantage she had, which at that point was simply this: she knew more than he thought she knew. So she waited. She kept logging numbers into a spreadsheet instead of raising her voice, which is a strange, quiet kind of courage nobody puts on a greeting card, and nobody at that dinner table would understand that until much later. There was a particular Tuesday, she'd remember later, when she sat in the school parking lot for 10 extra minutes after the last bell, just staring at the banking app on her phone, doing nothing, just breathing, before she drove home and made dinner like it was any other night. Patience like that isn't calm, it's just calm, looking. Underneath it, she was doing math constantly, what she'd need to prove, who she'd need to talk to, how long she could keep her face still at the dinner table, while Derek talked about his day like nothing in the world had changed. To understand why Elena handled it that way, quietly, on paper, at her own pace, instead of screaming the house down, you have to go back to when she was 12. She was in a different kitchen, a different state, listening to her own parents' marriage come apart over money her father had hidden for years in an account her mother never even knew existed. Her mother found out only after the divorce was basically final, by which point there was nothing left worth finding. She raised Elena afterward on a substitute teacher's pay, and whatever the courts eventually squeezed out of her ex-husband, which wasn't much, came late and came in checks that sometimes bounced. Elena made herself a private promise around that same kitchen table, one she never once said out loud to Derek in 9 years of marriage. She would never again let a man's version of the household finances be the only version that existed. That's not paranoia. That's just what a 12-year-old learns doing long division on what happens to women who don't keep their own records. It's why the spreadsheet existed at all, years before there was anything alarming to put in it. A habit built during the boring, ordinary stretch of the marriage, when there was nothing to hide and nothing to prove. That's exactly why. The instant the numbers stopped adding up, she already had 9 years of clean baseline data to compare against, instead of scrambling to build a case from zero under pressure. Margaret Marsh, Peggy, to just about everyone in Lima, and that was most people who ever set foot in her store, was 68 years old and still worked the floor at Marsh & Co. Hardware 5 days a week. Most mornings she ran the register herself from a tiny back office that smelled permanently of WD-40 and coffee reheated one too many times in the same chipped mug. Her late husband, Derek's father, had a quiet affair for nearly 2 years back when Derek was a teenager. The family rarely talked about it, but Peggy never let it go. Not in 3 decades. Out of that came a rule she applied to the whole family afterward. Half a joke, half dead serious. No locked doors in this house. At first she meant it literally. She actually went around disabling locks on bedroom doors. Then the grandkids started arriving, and she found a gentler, more modern way to keep the same instinct alive. Years ago, she set up a single shared iCloud photo album. Ostensibly, it was so the family could dump pictures of Noah and Lily in one place, instead of clogging up a group text with 300 blurry birthday photos. Every phone in the family synced to it automatically, quietly, in the background. The way these things do once you set them up and forget them. For years, nobody gave it a second thought. It sat there, ordinary and useful, the exact kind of small family arrangement nobody remembers agreeing to. Right up until the day it mattered more than anything else in Peggy's life. Derek started pulling away in small, deniable ways, a few more overnight trips than the job strictly required, Later texts he'd angle his phone away from at dinner, not realizing Elena had stopped checking his phone a long time ago. One night, cautious, almost apologetic, she tried to raise the missing $18,000, framing it as budgeting instead of accusation, the way you'd bring up a bill instead of a betrayal. "You're doing this again," Derek said, not looking up from the television. "Making something out of nothing." That was the whole conversation. Elena didn't push. She went upstairs, copied her spreadsheet onto a small external hard drive she kept tucked in her nightstand drawer under a stack of old greeting cards, and went to bed without another word. Derek felt like he'd won something small and satisfying. He got more careful with the withdrawals after that, smaller amounts, spaced further apart, harder to notice. Elena didn't need him to say anything. The new pattern told her he knew exactly what he had to hide, and that he now knew someone was watching. While Derek stayed busy covering his financial tracks, he made the one mistake nobody saw coming, least of all him. On a Tuesday evening at a Marriott off the interstate outside Toledo, he took a screenshot of a text from Bailey. Just a screenshot. He was standing near the window, the room's ugly floral bedspread faintly visible in the glass's reflection behind him. He forgot, the way people always forget the boring plumbing of their own devices, that his phone auto-saved screenshots straight into the shared family photo album. Not a message, not a call, just one photo that slid itself quietly in among 400 pictures of birthday cakes and school Christmas plays. Indistinguishable at a glance from anything else in there. Peggy found it on an ordinary Thursday night, scrolling through new editions to check for pictures of the girls' school photo day. Half paying attention, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She looked at it once, then again, a third time. Then she quietly closed the album and sat with it, alone in her kitchen, for a full day before doing anything. Then she picked up the phone herself, called the Marriott's front desk and asked, pleasant, unhurried, the same voice she used with vendors, to confirm a reservation date under Derek's name. It matched, almost to the hour, a business trip he'd casually described at family dinner not 2 weeks earlier. She didn't tell Derek. She didn't tell Elena either, not yet, not out of loyalty to her son, but because she wanted to be certain. The same way she'd want to be certain before signing off on a 5-figure inventory order at the store. She pulled the store's financial records that weekend, alone in the back office on a Saturday when it was normally closed, and cross-checked every business trip Derek had mentioned over the past year against actual XTR travel patterns she could piece together from things he'd said in passing. It took her most of the day. By the time she was done, she wasn't guessing anymore. With no idea his mother now knew everything, Derek moved faster than ever. He booked a second meeting with his attorney, this time to start drafting an actual custody strategy. The plan, in blunt terms his lawyer wrote down without comment, was to paint Elena as emotionally unstable, unreliable, not fit to have the kids most of the time. Ugly plan. He knew it was ugly. He told himself it was just leverage, a hardball tactic lawyers recommend all the time. He was banking heavily on that 40% stake in Marsh & Co. Hardware, his mother's company. She'd handed it to him years back as a head start, and he'd mostly taken it for granted, barely visiting more than a handful of times a year. In his mind, it was a financial floor no court could touch and no wife could argue past. A card to play the moment negotiations stalled. And he was banking on something even bigger, the assumption underneath every other assumption that, whatever else happened, his mother would stand behind her only son. Full stop. No questions asked. Family first. That was practically the Marsh family motto, at least as Derek understood it. He'd never stopped to ask himself what no locked doors actually meant to the woman who'd invented that rule in the first place. Peggy moved quietly and quickly, the way she'd handled every serious problem at the store for 30 years. She met privately with the family's longtime attorney, not Derek's lawyer, hers, the same man who'd drawn up the store's paperwork for over 2 decades. She had him restructure Derek's 40% stake in Marsh & Co. Hardware into a brand new trust. The named beneficiaries were Elena, Noah, and Lily, nobody else. The paperwork was finalized just 4 days before her own birthday party, signed at the same scarred desk in the back office, under the same coffee ring that had probably been sitting there since sometime around 2009. Derek had no idea any of it had happened. He walked into his mother's 70th birthday dinner still believing he held every card at the table, the shares, the custody strategy taking shape on his lawyer's desk, the quiet assumption that blood outranks a marriage license every time it's tested. He picked that specific dinner on purpose, in front of the whole family, because he wanted an audience for the moment he handed Elena the envelope. He wanted witnesses to what he was certain would be a clean, one-sided win. the kind of story he could tell later about the night he finally took control. At the table, in front of the whole family, Derek set the envelope down by Elena's plate and said it plainly enough for everyone to hear. He wanted primary custody, and he mentioned the hardware store shares almost casually, like a man setting a chess piece down where the whole room could see it. A quiet threat dressed up as a fact, delivered between the salad course and the cake. Elena didn't reach for the envelope. She didn't say anything at all, not yet. She just looked past Derek, at Peggy, at the far end of the table. Peggy stood up, not for her son, she said in the same unhurried voice she used to quote a customer a price on lumber that she already knew about Bailey. She said she'd seen the photo in the family album weeks earlier, had called the hotel herself to check the date, had gone to the store's books afterward just to be thorough, and had already moved his shares, all 40% of them, into a trust that now belonged to Elena, Noah, and Lily. She said it without raising her voice once. The room went silent in that specific way. A room goes silent when every single person at the table is quietly recalculating who actually holds power in it. Derek's whole plan, the leverage, the custody play, the bone-deep certainty that his mother would simply fall in line because he was her son, came apart in the space of about 4 sentences, at the one table in the world where he had been absolutely sure he couldn't lose. A few months later, XTR Logistics fired Derek over the relationship with Bailey. It was a clean violation of company policy, documented enough that he had almost no grounds to appeal. He'd lost the stock he'd planned to use as a bargaining chip in the divorce. And he'd lost his mother's support, the one thing he'd always needed, without ever stopping to think it could be taken away. Elena got primary custody of Noah and Lily. She began spending 3 afternoons a week at Marsh & Co. Hardware, learning the books alongside Peggy at that same scarred desk. Together, they quietly ran a company Derek had always talked about, like it was already his. Bailey Kinsley left XTR on her own not long after, moved to Columbus, and as far as anyone in Lima can tell, never spoke to Derek again once word got around. Derek ended up in a rented apartment on the other side of town, month-to-month lease, a parking spot he had to share. He sees Noah and Lily every other weekend now. People say he's quieter, less sure of himself. The ones who knew him before can sense something off, but they can't quite put a finger on it. Somewhere in a drawer at Peggy's house, there's still that brown envelope from the birthday dinner no one in that family has managed to forget. Derek thought it was the night he finally won. It was the night his own mother stood up.